Welcome, everyone, and thank you for joining us for EMBCA's 1776 America, 1821 Alas, Bridging Revolutions, Reflections Across Time webinar panel discussion. My name is Lou Katsos, EMBCA's president, and I will be moderating today's panel and introducing it. Our distinguished panel includes Alexander Billinis, author, writer, and Clemson University lecturer; Eric Hill, technologist, MMA instructor, and martial artist; and Dr. Constantine Hatzidimitriou, author and historian. As the United States commemorates the 250th anniversary of the Declaration of Independence, and Hellenes throughout the world continue to honor the enduring legacy of the Revolution of 1821, we are presented with an opportunity to reflect upon one of the most remarkable and enduring relationships in modern history. The story of America and Alas is not simply the story of two revolutions separated by an ocean and 45 years. It is a story of a continuing exchange of ideas, ideals, and people spanning centuries. Most importantly, it is the story of a two-way bridge. Ancient Alas helped shape the American Revolution. The American Revolution helped inspire the Hellenic Revolution. The Hellenic struggle for independence, in turn, influenced important reform movements in the United States, while generations of Hellenic Americans helped shape the nation they came to call home. The story begins long before Philadelphia in 1776 or the Peloponnese in 1821. The Founding Fathers did not create the American Republic in an intellectual vacuum. While influenced by English constitutional traditions, Christianity, and Enlightenment thought, they also looked deeply into the Hellenic world for guidance, inspiration, and warning. The writings of Aristotle, Thucydides, Polybius, Plutarch, and other Hellenic thinkers formed part of the intellectual foundation of revolutionary America. Classical education was central to the formation of the revolutionary generation, and the lessons of the Hellenic world profoundly influenced the emerging republic. From Aristotle, whose ideas concerned the rule of law and government serving the common good. From Thucydides came warnings about fractionalism and civic discord. From Polybius came insights into balanced government and the preservation of liberty through stable institutions. Even the experiences of the ancient Hellenic leagues informed debates that eventually led to the U.S. Constitution. Jefferson's famous phrase, "life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness," reflected a broader Hellenic understanding that political society exists not merely for survival, but to enable human flourishing and virtue. The influence of Alas extended beyond philosophy. America's civic architecture, educational institutions, public symbolism, and political vocabulary reflected a conscious engagement with classical models. The revolutionary generation saw itself as participating in a struggle between liberty and tyranny, whose roots stretched back to the ancient world. Yet the relationship between Alas and America was not merely intellectual. Even during the revolutionary itself, Hellenic figures and communities were present within the broader American story. Among the earliest Hellenic settlements in North America was New Smyrna in East Florida, founded in 1768 by settlers from Mani, Crete, and other parts of the Hellenic world, including other areas in Italy. Enduring harsh conditions under the Turnbull plantation system, many eventually escaped to St. Augustine. Their experiences unfolded amid the American Revolution and the contest between Britain and Spain for Florida, which Spain ultimately regained in 1783. Though not participants in the revolution itself, the New Smyrna Hellenes represent one of the earliest Hellenic communities in North America and an often overlooked connection between the Hellenic world and the age of American independence. More directly connected to the struggle for independence was Michael Dragon, born Michael Drakos in Athens. Serving under Bernardo de Galvez in Spanish campaigns allied with the American cause, Dragon participated in operations in Baton Rouge, Mobile, and Pensacola, and remains among the earliest documented Hellenes associated with the American Revolution. Taken together, the stories of New Smyrna and Michael Dragon remind us that the Hellenic connection to the revolutionary America was not merely philosophical. They were also lived through settlers, soldiers, merchants, and families whose lives interconnected with the great events that gave birth to the United States. As fellow panelist Dr. Constantine Hatzidimitriou has highlighted through his research, other Hellenic threads appear in unexpected places. One of the most intriguing figures of the founding era was Margaret Kimball Gage, wife of British General Thomas Gage. Through her grandmother, Elena Mavrocordato, Margaret possessed ancestry from the distinguished Mavrocordato family of Hughes. Historians have long debated whether she may have been among the sources that warned patriot leaders of British troop movements before Lexington and Concord. Dr. Hatzidimitriou also drew attention to John Paradise, born in Thessaloniki and later associated with Thomas Jefferson. Paradise's friendship with Jefferson reflected the continuing presence of Hellenic language, culture, and classical learning within the intellectual world of America's founding. Perhaps the most remarkable is the contribution of Hellenic medical knowledge to the survival of the revolution itself. Smallpox posed a greater threat to the Continental Army than many British campaigns. George Washington's decision to inoculate the Continental Army in 1777 is widely regarded as one of the most consequential decisions of the war. The roots of that decision can be traced in part to the pioneering work of Hellenic physicians, Emmanuel Timoni and Jacobus Pillerinos, whose documentation of virulation helped transmit knowledge that ultimately contributed to preserving Washington's army and arguably the revolution cause itself. Thus, Hellenic influence helped shape not only the philosophy of the American Revolution, but also contributed to its endurance. The influence, however, did not flow in one direction. The success of the American Revolution resonated throughout Europe and the Eastern Mediterranean. It demonstrated that a determined people could challenge a powerful empire and establish a nation grounded in constitutional principles and representative institutions. For Hellenic intellectuals living under Ottoman rule, the American example provided hope. Figures like Rigas Ferreos and Adamantios Korais were inspired by many of the same Enlightenment principles that influenced America's founders. The American experience demonstrated that liberty was not simply the ideal, but an achievable reality. When the Hellenic Revolution erupted in 1821, it represented far more than a military uprising. It was the political rebirth of a nation whose language, faith, culture, and historical memory had survived nearly 4 centuries of Ottoman rule. Americans immediately recognized something familiar in that struggle. Across the young republic, churches, civic organizations, newspapers, and ordinary citizens mobilized in support of Greece. The movement that emerged became one of the earliest large-scale humanitarian campaigns in American history. American Philhellenism represented more than admiration for ancient Greece. It reflected a belief that the principles proclaimed in Philadelphia in 1776 were once again being treated on the battlefields of Hellas. The influence of this movement extended far beyond Greek independence. Many Americans, who championed Greece, later became leaders in some of the most important reform movements in 19th century America. Among them stood Samuel Gridley Howe, having fought alongside the Hellenic revolutionaries. Howe returned to the United States profoundly transformed by the experience. He became a leading abolitionist, educator, humanitarian, and social reformer. For Howe and many fellow Philhellenes, the struggle for Greek independence and the struggle against slavery were connected by a common moral principle: that all human beings possess an inherent right to liberty. As fellow panelist Eric Hill has explored through his research, how his experience in Hellas also exposed him to the martial traditions and warrior culture of the Hellenic Revolution. These studies illuminate how concepts of citizenship, duty, sacrifice, and resilience, rooted in both ancient and modern Hellenic traditions, continue to shape movements for national freedom and self-government. The impact of Philhellenism on abolitionism is also overlooked. The networks, activism, and humanitarian spirit that mobilized support for Hellas later helped energize movements dedicated to ending slavery and expanding freedom within the United States. A similar pattern can be seen in the movement for women's rights. American women played a significant role in organizing relief efforts for Hellas, gaining experience in leadership, fundraising, and public advocacy. The skills and networks developed through these efforts contributed to the broader movement that eventually led to women's suffrage. In this sense, the Hellenic Revolution did not simply benefit from American inspiration, it also helped shape America itself. The relationship continued during the Civil War. As fellow panelist Alexander Billinis has documented through his research, Hellenic merchants played an important and often overlooked role in the global cotton trade that became central to the economic dimensions of the conflict. Hellenic merchant families and commercial networks operating throughout the Mediterranean, Britain, Egypt, and the Ottoman Empire helped redirect international cotton flows as the Union blockade disrupted Confederate exports. Their activities not only influenced global commerce, but also contributed to the rise of modern Greek shipping and international trade. Their story demonstrates the Hellenes were not merely observers of American history. They were participants in the economic transformation surrounding one of the nation's defining conflicts. As Hellenic immigration accelerated during the late 19th and early 20th centuries, a new chapter began. Generations of Hellenic immigrants helped build businesses, strengthen communities, advanced education, enriched the arts and sciences, served in government, and defended the nation in times of war. Their story became another chapter in the bridge first established between 1776 and 1821. Today, the relationship between Hellas and America remains one of the most enduring partnerships in the democratic world. It is a relationship forged through philosophy and faith, strengthened through revolution and sacrifice, renewed through immigration and diaspora, and sustained through shared commitments to freedom, democratic institutions, and human dignity. The distinguished panel assembled for this discussion reflects many dimensions of that story. Through the scholarship of Dr. Constantine Hatzidimitriou, the research of Alexander Billinis, the studies of Eric Hill, we continue to uncover new dimensions of the enduring relationship between America and Hellas. As we commemorate the 250th anniversary of American independence and reflect on the enduring legacy of the Hellenic Revolution, we are reminded that this bridge is not merely historical, it is living. It exists in our institutions, our communities, our values, and our continuing commitment to freedom, responsibility, civic virtue, and human dignity. As a Hellenic American, I feel, as many Hellenic Americans do, a profound connection to the spirit of 1776. The ideals that gave birth to the American Republic were deeply influenced by the intellectual and civic legacy of Hellas. Liberty, constitutional order, civic virtue, sacrifice, and resistance to tyranny form part of both the American and Hellenic historical experience. In that sense, the story of the American Revolution has become part of our shared inheritance, just as the story of Hellenic independence and the East Mediterranean story became part of America's own continuing journey towards a more perfect union. Ultimately, the story of 1776 and 1821 is not simply the story of two revolutions. It is the story of how one civilization helped inspire a republic, how that republic helped inspire a nation, and how together they contributed to humanity's continuing pursuit of liberty, democracy, justice, and human dignity. God bless America and Zito Yalas. I'd like now to introduce our first panelist. Many of you know him obviously very well because he's all the panelists you know very well because we've had many panel discussions together. Alexander Billinis has taught at Clemson University's honors program, political science and history departments. He is currently a full-time PhD student in Clemson's history department, where he specializes in Atlantic commercial history. He has a book contract with Louisiana State University regarding the U.S. merchant diaspora's role in the 19th century cotton trade. Beyond those subjects, Alexander lectures and publishes widely on Greek diaspora, merchant shipping, Balkan and Byzantine history subjects. He is a licensed attorney and a partner in real estate operations in Utah, South Carolina, Illinois, and Georgia. He is also a director of EMBCA. He is married with an adult son and a daughter in high school. Welcome, Alexander, and thank you for being with us today.
Well, thank you as well, Lou. It's always a pleasure to be here among colleagues and among very close friends. I admire all your work, and I want to echo God bless America and Zito Elas as we start. If we can pull up my slide deck, I promise it's not that long, because sometimes picture and verbiage is worth 1,000 words, particularly when I'm talking. So I chose to do more of an overview here because there's going to be some individual expertise from my colleagues that I think will provide more of the details. So I thought of things in trade terms, that the USA and Greece are basically been involved in a 250-year plus condition of importing and exporting revolutions, ideals, and certainly also, and mostly one way, our immigration to Greece. So if we can flip to the next slide. Okay. So both countries are born of revolution, and they're born of ideas plus facts on the ground. As Lou stated very eloquently, and I don't need to really add to that, the ideas were shared. The intellectual and cultural framework did not exist in a vacuum, and certainly the classics, particularly the Greek precedents, informed our American Revolution, just as the Greek Revolution was formed by the exportation of the American Revolution. And this is my favorite. Like Greeks, Americans will tell you when we got our independence. Not 1783, like the British said. We decide when we're independent, just like the Greeks with 1821. I mean, the realities are somewhat different, but it shows you that both nations are warrior nations, are believers in freedom, and believers in creating human agency and facts on the ground. Next slide. So, for example, the exportation of revolution. There's this guy, not my daughter and I, but the statue, Rigas Ferreos, who just a few years after the successful conclusion of the American Revolution and during the tumult of the Napoleonic era, dreamed of a Balkan federal republic, which would mesh Byzantium with French and American revolutionary ideas. That was just over 20 years after the American Declaration of Independence. And of course, by the powers that be in Europe, this could not be born. And the Austrians arrested him and handed him over to the Ottomans, who arrested him in Belgrade or who strangled him in Belgrade. This statue is on one of Belgrade's busiest streets. But as we know, it didn't stop. As he said, as he was being hauled away to strangulation, I have sown a rich seed which others will harvest. Next slide, please. As we said before, aside from the action of revolutionaries like Rigas and the actual men who did the fighting on the ground, there was also an exchange of ideas. And here I have pictures of both Corais and Jefferson, who knew one another and were passing notes back to each other, ideas, ethos. Certainly Jefferson, who learned Greek as a youth, relished the opportunity to speak to a native Greek speaker. So once again, we're talking about a two-way exchange. And both of these prominent thinkers that were instrumental to the emergence of their respective countries had an opportunity to spend time in situ with one another in one of the most intellectually fomenting cities in the world, Paris. Next slide. This is one of my favorite topics, and Lou and Eric know it well. The New Orleans Greeks, Dragon and Dimitri. Lou gave a great introduction. I'll dive a little bit deeper. We believe that Michalis Dragon, was the first Greek who arrived in New Orleans. As Lou mentioned, he fought with the Spanish in the American Revolution. I believe that he is the only documentable Greek who fought in the American Revolution, but I'm not sure, and perhaps Constantine has more information on that. At least that's the only documentable one. And of course, two Greeks get together, and Andreas Dritsakos Dimitri from Hydra arrives about 30 years later and marries Dragon's daughter. And along with other Greeks, he fought in the Battle of New Orleans, where he played a prominent role. And according to Dimitri family lore, his son was the first to find out that the Americans were actually victorious at the Battle of New Orleans. And he brought the news back to a grateful city. It's worth noting that the threads of history continue. And Dimitri and Dragon's descendant, Vicky Dimitri, is a wonderful, lovely lady who's a parishioner at Holy Trinity Greek Orthodox Church in New Orleans. And this is probably the oldest identifiable Greek family in the United States. Next slide. So let's go to the period after American independence and just before Greek independence. We know that during the Barbary Wars, where the United States refused to pay tribute to the Barbary pirates, which we might note were tributary to the Ottoman Sultanate, the Americans sent troops and ships in, and we know that the Greeks fought with U.S. Marines at Derna. This is a subject I'm very interested on as a Hydriot and Aegean Islander. I believe strongly that Aegean Islanders, particularly from the three largest nautical islands, Hydra, Spetses, and Psara, must have collaborated with the Americans. The Hydra archives have confirmed to me that Hydriot ships in this same period called at American ports, particularly Boston and New York. I suspect New Orleans was also on their itinerary. And one of the reasons why the Hydriots were active at this time is because a lot of European shipping was either on one side or the other of the Napoleonic Wars, and the Hydriots had the opportunity to switch flags. Contrary to popular belief, it wasn't Onassis that started the flag switching. So the Hydriots could have sailed under the Ottoman banner to the United States. And I've also read anecdotes that suggest that Boston Brahmins who wanted to work on their Greek would come down to speak to these sailors. Now, the honest truth is a lot of the Hydriot sailors were more conversant in Arvanitika than in Greek, but obviously there were people amongst them that spoke a very good Greek, and the Bostonians wanted to have an exposure to actual Hellenes since they had been reading the classics. Next slide. So then, of course, we have the Greek Revolution beginning. Recognition by the United States was a close call. As is often the case, economic interests stymied the popular desire, particularly from Americans such as Daniel Webster, to have recognition of the Greek state. So the honor for the first state to recognize Greece goes to another American republic, Haiti, which honored Greece by being the first nation to recognize Greek independence. Having said that, though the American government maintained a neutrality, the American people did not. This was a cause célèbre. This was a cause that united Americans North and South, united Americans really of all political sides. It also, as we know, got a lot of interest from people in the emerging abolitionist movement who saw the Greeks' enslavement as a parallel to enslavement here in the United States. Several refugees were adopted by Americans, and they became prominent in both American and Greek affairs. And as Lou has mentioned, the experience of being activists, and as we know, many Americans fought and many died in Greece, but many who returned also were major boosts to the abolitionist and suffragette movements. Next slide. Now let's talk about the first wave of Greeks into the United States, the merchants. Circa 1852, the US consul in Odessa was a fellow named John Raleigh, or Ioannis Rallis, of the famous Raleigh merchant clan of Chios. Odessa was the main grain port of the Russian Empire with a huge Greek population there. And he warned the State Department about the impending war between the Russians and the British, French, and Ottomans, and that there is an opportunity for American grain producers because American grain had not yet conquered Europe. And 10 years later, when the Civil War has started, American grain formed an interesting counterbalance to the whole question of American cotton. I would suggest that there is a Greek connection here. And shortly thereafter, Raleigh and Co. established their first New York office, and I believe that was in 1853 as well. And dozens more offices followed, and by the 1860s, they were involved in multiple types of trade, particularly grain, cotton, and jute. The two great American hubs of this merchant diaspora, which had links throughout the world and was primarily, but not exclusively, from the island of Chios, had the opportunity to work with their colleagues around the world. By the time of the Civil War, each location had between 150 and 200 Greeks, and many of them were wealthy merchants with networks that spread from the American continent to the Indian subcontinent. The gentleman here is Dimitrios Botassi, who's not Chiot. He was one of the only non-Chiots in this merchant milieu. He was from the island of Spetses. So as a Saronic boy, I gave my props to a fellow Saronic islander, but he also had the distinction of being Greek consul in New York for, I believe, 60 years. So he saw through the merchant era, but also was instrumental in helping to pave the way for the huge wave of Greeks who came in the 1890s and thereafter. So these individuals were very much pioneers to our American story. Next slide. I'd like to talk a little bit more about merchants in the Civil War. Just as a rally in Odessa tipped off his colleagues elsewhere to set up an office in New York to be involved in the grain trade, well, in 1861, the Raleigh office in New York, and I ought to add here, New Orleans, advised setting up Indian cotton operations due to the coming Cotton War that's part of the American Civil War. By the way, this was not the first office that the rallies had in India, because they were also heavily involved in the jute trade. And part of the reason they were involved in the jute trade is the rallies in Russia advised their colleagues and family members that the cutting off, apologies, my four-footed children, the cutting off of trade due to the Crimean War cut off Russian hemp, and Indian jute became an alternative commodity that could be used in packaging. So you have this constant flow back and forth based on the requirements of the era. Further, aside from opening offices elsewhere, many New Orleans Greek merchants with expertise in the most advanced cotton market left either from New Orleans to New York, Egypt, Europe, the Ottoman Empire, or India. And my book's thesis, and I've got multiple arguments to this effect, is that they played a key, understated, and often forgotten role in developing alternatives to Confederate cotton, which may have played an important role in the outcome of the American Civil War. Here I give you an example of one of these intrepid Hiot merchants. This is Alexander Michael Agelasto, born in Syros in 1833 of refugees from the Hiot massacre. He had offices in New Orleans prior to the Civil War, left New Orleans in 1862, moved to Europe, then to India, then back to the US, where he also helped to found the Memphis Cotton Exchange before retiring in Virginia and working in the jute and cotton trades. And his descendants still live in Virginia. Next slide. Then, of course, as the 1800s drew to a close, we have the mass immigration of Greeks. And most of us are products of that mass immigration. The overwhelming majority of Greek immigrants arrive after 1890, and immigration with ebbs and flows continued into the 1970s. Now, these were economic migrants, usually poor, yet upwardly mobile. And like other Southern and Eastern Europeans, and in contrast to the earlier merchants, they endured a great deal of bigotry and struggle. Their rags to riches success story is the standard Greece America narrative. This is all true, but there is more. And the picture I have here is of Ergatis, which claimed to be the only weekly Greek English newspaper, the first of its kind. It was published from 1906, I believe, to 1908 in my hometown, and you'll see I highlighted it, of Salt Lake City. I mention this for a couple of reasons, because yes, the majority of those immigrants were poor, but they had the same thirst for agency that is characteristic of America and is characteristic of Greece. They were upwardly mobile and they had a thirst for education. I think it's important because you often hear offhanded comments by Greeks themselves that are suggesting that these immigrants are poor, illiterate immigrants, and look how far we've come. The fact is, those individuals were giants, and we are standing on the shoulders of those giants. Next slide, please. So I believe strongly, and Lou and Eric have heard this so many times, that we really have to have, what did Eric call it, an additive approach to the America-Greece story, right? There's no question the main act is the migration of hundreds of thousands of Greeks to America and their millions of descendants. But there's more. There's the revolution story. There's the merchant story. By the way, there's the naval merchant marine story. I just came from a maritime history conference, and there is an absolute thirst for more of the Greek merchant marine story, because that dovetailed with the Pax Americana, with the emergence of the United States as the most powerful country in the world. These are great stories. We need to tell these stories, not as much to ourselves, but as Americans to all Americans. And here I'm paraphrasing my good friend Lou, who says all too often and never enough that we can't just talk about ourselves to ourselves. Thank you very much.
Alexander, thank you so much for that. And we'll come back to some of those issues. In particular, the Brahmins. I want to talk about the Brahmins of New England, because it's also a fascinating story, and it ties into to a certain degree of what Eric is going to talk about. But we'll come back to that. So our next panelist is Eric Hill, who is a technology professional with nearly 3 decades of experience in computer engineering, cybersecurity, advanced automation, and critical infrastructure. A graduate of the University of New Hampshire with a degree in computer engineering, he has extensive experience supporting the defense and intelligence communities through dual-use technologies, and has presented at military intelligence and industry conferences in the United States and abroad, including NATO's Center at Sudo Bay in Crete. For nearly 4 decades, he has also studied and taught Hellenic warrior arts, trained under Jim Arvanitis, founder of the modern Pankration revival. He became a certified instructor of Hellenic combatives and competed in mixed arts martial arts. In 2014, he launched a Hellenic martial arts program for diaspora youth, promoting Hellenic history, philosophy, and martial traditions. Eric currently develops the Olympus MMA training framework, integrating Hellenic culture and combat training. He is also a director of EMBCA, an advocate for youth mentorship and STEM development, and together with his wife, Hatzidimitriou, is raising 3 children within the Hellenic tradition. Welcome, Eric, and thank you again for being with us.
Well, thank you for that introduction, Lou. If I may, your previous introduction and Alex's presentation dynamically caused me to reflect. Just want to go into an entry point into my presentation. I was raised in New England, so some of the folks I'll be talking to are obviously from the Northeast. Last year, I've always known through oral history through my grandfather that our roots go deeply back. He said to the Mayflower, we actually affirmed it through DNA testing. Ironically, my aunt and my sister last year, in an effort for USA 250 this year, wanted to get them the daughters of the American Revolution. In a total ironic sense, because we actually have documentation to a certain point in Massachusetts, we have an ancestor on my grandmother's side who fought in the Revolution. So we have documented back to the Revolution itself, and that's the topic we have today. And I'm actually going to touch on that and some of the historical actors I'm talking about also. I'd also like to comment on the part of Alex's commentary on the immigrants here. My wife's side, she's first generation. Her parents both came here in the late 60s, and they were both highly educated. The language barrier, the profession shifted, but they were highly successful off of that. So it's a very interesting discussion on, per Alex's comment, who comes over, when, and what happened. I was also fortunate. I was at a Hellenic dance festival in January, and I was fortunate to travel to the spot of the compound of Dragon we were talking about, and also one of the children who had actually been the messenger for Jackson when they beat the British, to go back to the city and notify everybody. So it was a very interesting story. And down the street was Lafayette Park. So all this history was swirling with me even to this day. Even traveling to Argos with Lou in my individual travels in northern Greece, and of course with Lou again, Sparta. So this is all living history to me. In the future before us is not something that's dead that I'm about to bring up. This is all real, and it lives in our children and hopefully our grandchildren. One of the things I always talk to is warrior ethos in civil society. Revolutions, particularly for democracies, are born typically in a warrior ethos of the middle class. So if you could, Costa, could you bring up my slide deck? And I'll be looking off a little bit because as I get older, my vision, actually, it's not bad. Not my typical graphics. I just wanted to map this quickly back. This is the exact topic, Reflections Through Time. This is the title of this panel. If you could, next slide. You're going to notice a thread subtly of warrior ethos. I'm not going to keep bringing it up. These are more history points. And feel free to chime in, Professor, if I make mistakes. Or anybody on here, no problem. I'm a data guy, not a historian, and in some ways out of place on here. One of my fascinations of Decatur, he was a martial arts expert. In fact, he died in a duel in a random accident with a pistol. Either way, what is interesting is he ties together several things in this history timeline, several points of data. In the first Barbary War, 1801, taking place 1805, and between the U.S. and Turkey. And I said U.S. and Turkey because in one of the documents I was going over, it said a Turkish flag vessel. So instead of saying Ottoman Empire, I ended up putting Turkey in here this morning. Stephen Decatur served as first lieutenant on the USS Essex during the first Barbary War, which was 1801 to 1805. He did shift the ship assignment. That's a little bit out of scope of the presentation. He was transferred to the USS Enterprise, where USS Constitution, which will come in later, captured the Turkish flag, Mastiko. All I can think of is probably Mastika, but a Mastiko as a prize of war. And this was declared by the U.S. Navy after it was presented. Now, he died in 1820. The reason I'm presenting this is this was the U.S. This war was literally against the Turkish Empire, Ottoman Empire, and it ties together some very interesting aspects. The USS Constitution was highly engaged in the Med during the Greek Revolution. This will come out also a little bit later with a very interesting historical tidbit, and it recalls some of the things that go through me when I go to Greece, to these different eras and a lot of the people that I know and speak to. And I do speak the language for those watching, so I can actually even read road signs. Next slide. So this is the United States Wars with the Barbary Powers. It was published in 1940. So if you look at this, I'm going to slip over the writings a little bit smaller for me. This document I had looked at in 1821. I had mentioned to Lou, and he knows because it was an EMBCA effort responding through some of the historical works. I wanted to bring this in today, and Professor brought this up. Do you know this is a fact? Well, the only thing I know is the name, and it's compelling to me because I know where Black community was sent in the Navy because of a high attrition rate, and they were in dangerous positions. So you notice I named, and some of the other documents I read were battles in the freshwater lakes in Canada, and they were in these positions. Set up main top mast, breast backstays. You can notice the name James Williams. The first lieutenant colonel on this ship at this time under Bainbridge was Decatur. Just an interesting data points. Does it mean it's the person in question that we're going to talk about next? That's a matter of probably more research. Next slide, please. So here we have the entry, Conditions of Greece in 1827 and 1828. Colonel Jonathan Peckham Miller, also born and raised in New England. He was a soldier. He went over to Greece and took up arms. Now, I have an entry about him and how a little bit later. December 21st, I actually read this 2021 to how many schools? I think like 8 streaming schools at once, K1 through 8, read this particular entry. A brave American Negro took James Williams, a Black man from Baltimore, into my house. He having been some time in the hospital, Williams came to Greece with Lord Cochrane, was cook of the Savoie, and conducted himself with great coolness and intrepidity in several engagements, particularly at the Battle in Gulf of Lepantos, where he showed truly that he had been in the school of Decatur. So there's an implication there. For when no Greek could be found to take the helm, Williams volunteered his services and was there struck down by a splinter, which broke his leg and arm. He had before contended with the Turks, for he had lost a finger before Algiers in the United States service under Decatur. Now, there's timing involved and whatnot. I just found that provocative through them. I threw this in the presentation to get a lot of people looking and talking, and it may not be relevant, but I thought it was interesting, the point before on the Navy document. But again, this goes back to warrior ethos. He kept going and moving and driving through, and he ended up in Greece and kept serving valiantly. Next slide, please. The USS Constitution was involved heavily in events. This is something I had uncovered, particularly with Howe in Napoli. He and Perkins, by the way. But I found this entry particularly, this kind of relates to how I deal with these. Lou mentioned as we entered, I've been in military installations there. One of the most fascinating things was going across the bay where the Greeks smashed the Persian fleet with a number of Greek American youth on combat craft to visit and pay respects to the Hellenic Navy SEALs. Here you have visit with the U.S. Constitution. I accordingly went on board the frigate, where I was politely received by my gallant countrymen and bid welcome on board the Constitution, a ship which I have always had the greatest curiosity to see. And I grew up in the vicinity of that ship, and I'd been on it many times as a youth. Captain Patterson, not being on board, having gone to visit the tomb of Agamemnon, I remained until his return. If you've been to Greece and you're familiar with traveling in Greece, you know that's not easy. So he's there on a warship, and he took time to go see the tomb. From him, I received a hearty welcome, also an offer all the assistance in his power to promote the object of our voyage to Greece. So here you have a captain on the USS Constitution actually taking time to go to the tomb, which again, if you traveled in the vicinity at that time, these roads that exist today weren't there. So very difficult to get to. And that, by the way, the Constitution was called Old Ironsides because it was in many battles. Patterson was distinguished, very well known. Upon the next part of that entry, calling on the government at Napoli. Upon going on shore, Dr. Howe and myself waited on the provincial government of Napoli and explained to them our instructions for disposing of the cargo of the Chancellor. Now, what they had done is they brought cargo over for supplies for the people of Greece, not meant for soldiers, meant for the suffering civilians. This particular instance, when he says the government, you had several aspects going on in factions. In particular, you had General Grievous up above and Kolokotronis down below. Both Perkins and Howe knew them very well. In fact, Howe here had intervened. I don't think I have this in the slide, but if you could go to next slide, I may talk to what happened here. Oh, okay, this is a separate entry. Meant to have that a little bit earlier. So in Napoli, I'll talk to the previous incident. There was Grievous and Kolokotronis. They were given a certain amount of rations. They tried to get more. Howe went in and actually brokered them not stopping. And you may ask, how does a single American do that? Well, one, he was a hand-to-hand expert. So they all knew it. This is an untold story. You have to read the writing and understand the subtleties that you're reading. But they all knew it. Lou Katsos respected him and others. If you read the writings of some of the daughters and some of the peripheral folks. But on the other hand, he also wrote a letter that he had a letter written that implied the USS Constitution would bomb them. So very interesting scenario of using your mind and your skill set. Here is an entry that addresses what I'm talking to. This is as Howe was entering Greece in his diary. And he was not happy with an Englishman. And he writes, dueling I despise, and would not for a world have man's blood on my conscience, but I do not believe he can find a gentleman on board to second him. His traveling companion will not have anything to say to him. If he challenges, I shall have my choice of weapons. I'm a pretty good master of the small sword. I think I should contrive to disarm him and make him beg on his knees, for I am sure he is one of the most arrant cowards. So though the subtleties in what he's saying, dealing with weapons and arms, he's actually highly trained. Boston was a center of excellence at the time. It probably warrants more study in and of itself, but that goes into actually combat sports era. I'm willing to bet he also had bare knuckle training as well as grappling. His daughters also documented his skills in teaching them disarms when they were younger, little children. He'd do that as a source of play. Nonetheless, these men walking into Greece, including Howe, who was a civilian, later on in the story, you'll see what I'm talking about. Next slide, please. So this is a tie back to the American Revolution that I hadn't seen mentioned by anybody. So I wanted to pull this in since I brought in Howe. Now I'm going to go back to the American Revolution. This is in the Letters and Journals of Samuel Gridley Howe, and it was edited by Laura Richards and Franklin Benjamin Sanborn. He was a politician in Massachusetts at the time, good friend of his also. And one was my father, and I would eager something that his grandfather, Edward Constantine Howe, who was one of the Indians of the Boston Tea Party. So if anyone knows their history, the Boston Tea Party was a very big event, kicking off issues with the British of note. Was a black swan, a dark-haired Howe. I may add that when my heard of this ancestor and his exploit, she exclaimed, "Dr. Howe is explained." So I'm kind of riveting back a little bit before the Revolution and coming forward to Howe and his ancestry coming through as I kind of riveted back to my own. Not comparing the two, just talking about this is repeated over many, many Americans have this in their background. And this is actually talks very, very specifically to me. This ties everything together. Next slide, please. This ties everything together in this entry. And this is Christophoros Platon Kastanis. This was written in 1851. If I recall correctly, he was one of the young men that Howe took over. This is actually, he documents this in his journey. The Greek exile, a narrative of the captivity and escape during the massacre on the island of Scio by the Turks, together with various adventures in Greece and America. And which is interesting is he in his original work, he actually puts in big letters, Greece and America. I'm going to read the whole entry. Egyptian regulars were at our heels. I can read it in front of me better, actually. We're at our heels. Dr. Howe and Colonel Miller. So if you remember the Jonathan Peckham Miller's entry we read earlier, of Washington's country, meaning the United States, went shoulder to shoulder with the Greek and taught them that the children of democracy are one and indivisible wherever they go. This is actually how I look at it myself. The frightful, ghastly, and monstrous ferocity and tiger-like bloodthirstiness of the modern Sus of Pharaoh required no Red Sea to stop their carrier. But when they attempted to sail the mills, they were overwhelmed in the wave of their blood. In vain did the thunders of French tactics and European gunnery, because they were trained by the French, seek to penetrate the place where 2 or 3 sons of Columbia were gathered together. The oppressors fled, scattered like sand in Simon. Colonel Miller led a band of Suliote warriors. I don't know if that's well known, but he did. In fact, he and Howe were suited likewise, and marched through the flying sand, raised by the hostile cannonball, shouting to his men to strike on. Virite. On the open fields, the few met the many and put them to rout. The names of Dr. Howe and Colonel Miller associated with such a brilliant action need no flourish of my feeble pen, since a memento of their worth is impressed upon the heart of the Greek nation. This is the most interesting line. After the battle, Dr. Howe made himself doubly useful by bestowing surgical care upon the wounded. So he's participating in the battle, and then he turns right around and starts giving critical care to folks. This to me is the epitome of a civilian actor with warrior ethos. Next slide. And to tie this all together, I actually was speaking to I reflected on my experience in New Orleans on the compound the Greeks that were the first Greeks that were there, and then actually at Lafayette Park, where they had offered actually to be governor. This was after the revolution, obviously. What I find fascinating in tying Howe back to the revolution, bring forward his inspiration for being there. You often see him mention Lord Byron, but I can tell you for a fact Lafayette was an inspiration. In fact, Howe was spoken of as the Lafayette of the Greek Revolution. Great irony is I've not seen anyone bring this out. You'll notice here the scene is Paris, France, and there's a revolution about to break out. This revolution, known as that of the 3 days, needed no help from foreign hands. Lafayette, seeing the young American, meaning Howe, about to expose himself to danger, is said to have admonished him gravely, saying, "Young man, reserve yourself for the needs of your own country. This is our battle." But Lafayette, a little later, found in his young friend an able coadjutor in a task of some difficulty and intended with grave peril. The Polish nation were at this time in revolt against their Russian masters. So what is fascinating here is here's Lafayette after the Greek Revolution. Howe meets him. So he's in the American Revolution. Howe meets him after the Greek Revolution. Howe's called the Greek Lafayette, Lafayette of the Greek Revolution. And Lafayette says, don't participate in our revolution. Hey, by the way, the Russians are doing something over here to the Poles. And as we know, the Russians were also involved in Greece in different manners. But I just found that fascinating. On the right side here, what you're going to notice, it's an entry, resolutions of the General Court. I believe that's from the Massachusetts section of the government there. Resolved that it's a declaration that the people of Massachusetts, always desirous of liberty for themselves and for others, proudly cherish the recollection of the gallant spirit which led Dr. Howe in youth and mature manhood in an advancing age to rank himself with many or with few among the champions of oppressed races and emancipated nationalities, emulating in this deeds of his countrymen in the American Revolution, in the noble career of his friend and friend of mankind, the illustrious Lafayette. This is a government document included in this paper after declaration included after Howe died. So people were aware of their relationship. What's also important to understand is Howe was also bathed in Hellenism. He's part of that movement, as was Perkins and some of the others. If you read his historical sketch of the Greek Revolution, he gives a fascinating background. He understands the Eastern Roman Empire. He even understands what's happening in regions of Pontus, which is where my wife's side is from. So very fascinating tie-in, in my view. Next slide. My traditional thank you on an EMBCA panel. I just wanted to present some interesting data. Ease in subtly that whole warrior ethos conversation involving the revolutions and the intellect.
Eric, thank you so much. And the name of Perkins comes up again.
So
right, yeah, which we'll discuss, because Perkins is a very interesting character. You know, he was obviously one of the Brahmins.
Yep.
Obviously, you know how. Ended up taking the so-called Perkins Institute for the Blind and all the rest of that. Perkins obviously donated money towards that, but many people don't know that that Perkins and people like Perkins, but mostly Perkins, was part of the reason that America actually did not, in fact, get involved in the Greek Revolution.
Exactly. I think Howe knew that, and I think he approached it.
and that had to do basically with the opium trade that Perkins was involved in terms of buying opium from the Ottomans and selling it to the in the Chinese market for like four times the value. But that's another discussion. With that, I'm going to thank you again, Eric. With that, I'm going to introduce our next panelist again, who many people know because he's been on various panels with us. And thank you for that, Constantine. Dr. Constantine Hatzidimitriou holds a doctorate of Byzantine, Ottoman, and modern Greek history from Columbia University. He was a Gennadius Fellow at the American School of Classical Studies in Athens and an educational counselor at the U.S. Consulate in Thessaloniki, where he also served as a professor at Antolia College. Currently, he is the managing editor of the American Journal of Contemporary Hellenic Issues and the Journal of Modern Hellenism, and a research associate at St. John's University in New York City. Dr. Hatzidimitriou is also the author of 3 books: Navios, A Future Built Upon Historical Tradition of Innovation and Excellence; American Accounts Documenting the Destruction of Smyrna; and Founded on Freedom and Virtue, Documents Illustrating the Impact in the United States of the Greek War of Independence. In addition to many articles in scholarly journals in the fields of Byzantine and modern Greek history and education. In 2022, his book on Smyrna was updated and published in the modern Hellenic language. He is currently working on a new book on the American Philhellenes during the Hellenic Revolution, and another one on Central Greece during the Byzantine and Ottoman periods. Welcome, Constantine, and thank you again for being with us today.
Thank you for that introduction, Lou, Elia, and my presentation. Following these fascinating details that our other speakers have given. Mine is more general. It's about the entire topic, and it is a lecture that you've heard before and many others have, because we gave together several lectures at the Federation in connection with this year's parade activities. So this presentation is really a repeat of that presentation on the overview. And let me see if I can share my screen and get the PowerPoint up, which is the same one, virtually the same one that I used. Let me see if that comes up. Yep, there it is. And let me just go through it.
Costa, we don't see it.
Oh, you don't see it? Okay.
No, I don't see it.
Zoom, let me share the screen again. All right, let me get out of this. Go share. Do you see it now?
No, not yet.
Okay.
Does he have permission to share? Does the host have to fix that, maybe?
He does have permission.
Do I have permission?
Yeah.
Okay. Let me see. Maybe I'm looking at the wrong screen.
It seems to be coming up.
Okay.
It's not up yet. Oh, there it goes. It's up.
It's up. Okay, great. And let me go to the right mode. All these technical things that I always find challenging. There's usually a little icon to click on. Let's see here. I think I see it here.
On the left of the title.
Well, you can see it, right? So let me just go through it. And it doesn't matter that the panel shows on the side, I don't think. So historians have called the 19th century the age of revolutions. That's what this slide is. This is because with the spark that ignited the struggle for freedom and independence in the Americas, people from many places sought fundamental change. Look at this timeline. And here you see the American Revolution, French Revolution, the Haitian Revolution, which everybody else has talked about, and was the first country to recognize the Greeks. 2026 marks the celebration of 250 years of American independence and 205 years of freedom based on crucial events in global history and Hellenism. And each one impacted the other. The first was the creation of a new kind of nation, a democratic republic, ruled not by kings or oligarchs, but by the people with individual rights and freedoms almost unknown at the time. The second was the desperate and prolonged struggle of the Greek people for freedom from Ottoman tyranny, which started in 1821 and continued for 8 years until a new Hellenic nation was created, which not as independent or free as the United States, but which began a long process towards unification and real independence over time. And that's an important point to realize, that it took a very long time for Greece really to become independent and to bring the rest of the Hellenes, as much as they could, into this new state. What I have to say today is based on a detailed research over many years, and I presented this in a book, and you see the book here, followed by several scholarly articles. The book, entitled Founded on Freedom and Virtue, documents illustrating the impact of the United States on the Greek War of Independence, was published in 2002 and contains, I believe, the largest number of primary sources on the subject, and is now available online. So you don't have to buy it, folks. You can just download it and utilize anything in it. Currently, I'm working on a new book on the Philhellenes, a subject on the American Philhellenes, a subject which I think is in dire need of research. It is often overlooked that the United States played a unique and important role in the Greek Revolution, a legacy that may serve as a guide for informing future Greek-American relations. It also serves to demonstrate that the close ties that bind the Greek and American people go beyond power politics and greed and economic interests and government and the policies. My focus is to call attention to the fact that during Hellenism's most desperate hours during the war, when all seemed lost, the American people proved themselves better than their government and sent precious aid to Greece and inspired the Greeks to create a democratic republic like their own, which of course they didn't do. They ended up with a kingdom, but that's another story. This unprecedented American philanthropy saved thousands of innocent Greek lives and went well beyond what any other nation has done before or since. This, in fact, was America's greatest contribution to the revolution, which was far more important than the usual rhetoric that is usually emphasized. Recently, I have also added new material to the book concerning America's contribution to the Greek Revolution as part of a remarkable Stockton State University exhibit and online publication entitled The Greek Revolution Through American Eyes, which was exhibited in New York as part of this year's Federation and Parade events. And I want to thank Mr. Katsos for Lou for making that possible, and for Tom Papadimitriou for making it available. In that exhibit, and what's particularly important, this is the reason why I bring it up, is it's not only the panels, but it was based on the book. But what Tom did and his colleagues at Brookline at Hellenic College is they assembled an international group of scholars who've written on various aspects of the subject, and they published online studies. And these online studies really are invaluable and contain a lot of information on the so-called orphans, on the role of women, on abolitionism, all different aspects. And they very much enhance the panels and the information on the panels. And that is also available online for free. And I encourage anyone listening to this to download that as well and take a look at those essays. There's also a bibliography that I helped put together on books that have been published that can also be consulted in addition. Now, I'm going to begin by giving you a summary of the American involvement in 1821 and its relation to 1776. And my purpose is not to go over the usual material, although you've heard some of it already, ladies and gentlemen. You probably are familiar with some of it, but to try to add some, what I hope will be interesting information. I know people like visuals. Greece's ultimately successful 1821 revolt was a complex affair that lasted almost a decade and had an immediate and devastating impact upon the lives and material well-being of its people. It is difficult for us to imagine the sacrifices and desperate situation the fighters of 1821 faced. By 1826, it looked like the war was lost, and that after 5 years of struggle, their bid for freedom from Ottoman rule would fail. As we all know, foreign intervention, especially the destruction of the Ottoman fleet at Navarino, resulted in a nominally independent Greek state. And since it's been mentioned already, the role of the African American Williams in that battle that one of the previous speakers mentioned, it was a naval battle, the Battle of Itea, and there were actually two other Americans involved in that battle as well. And he served on the ship, the Sotiras, which actually was involved in multiple engagements. And it was in a previous panel that we did on Williams, Lou Elia had suggested to me that I investigate the ship and its various engagements. And I did some detailed research on the ship. And sure enough, his suggestion proved very fruitful. And although Williams is not mentioned per se, the fact that he was on board indicates that he served in those engagements and played a genuinely heroic and important role. And again, it's not realized that the Battle of Itea, which the steamship Kateria was involved with Hastings, and Howe served on that ship as well. It really led to the Battle of Navarino and was crucial to the sequence of events that had that battle take place. And that's not often mentioned, the relationship between the two. And there is that wonderful American connection where you've got three Americans serving in the little fleet that defeated the Ottomans in Itea in the Gulf of Corinth, and really opened up the Gulf of Corinth so the Greeks could send reinforcements and really bolster the revolution in central Greece at the time when it was not going very well. But let me go back to the information that I was talking about. During the period of the revolution, the events captured the imagination of the American people in a widespread movement of sympathy and support. The newspapers called Greek fire or fever. Thousands of everyday Americans, especially in the Northeast, followed the war's progress and passed numerous resolutions of support. There you've got one there. Hundreds of newspaper articles were written and reprinted, and ordinary citizens formed local committees and participated in town meetings and fundraising events. Obscure Greek personalities such as Ypsilantis, Botzaris, Kolokotronis, Bouboulina, Mavrokordatos, and place names such as Suli, Chios, and Messalongi became well known to the American public. Many of the most significant writers, artists, dramatists of early 19th century America produced works related to the Greek struggle. For example, the famous poet William Cullen Bryant wrote a poem called The Greek Boy about a real historical figure, Christos Evangelidis, an 1821 refugee who came to New York City, graduated from Columbia College, and has left us the earliest diary by a Greek American. Even special music was composed in relation to the Greek Revolution called Greek heirs. You've got the monument of Ypsilantis. You've got that's Evangelides, and here's something which I picked up from an article of my friend Steve Frango's sheet of the music that was produced at the time. It would be interesting if some of that music was played during events related to the Greek Revolution. To my knowledge, they've never been played since that time. It is probably safe to say that the Greek image did not enjoy the same level of name recognition again in America until the 1960s, when motion pictures like Zorba the Greek and the Onassis phenomenon captured the popular imagination. Why did the Greek struggle capture the popular imagination? There were many reasons. America was fertile ground for such a movement. Ancient Greek language and literature was still very much part of its educational system, as was the debt that Western ideals owed to classical Greek civilization. Another factor was the fervent Christianity that dominated society. Most Americans perceived the struggle in Greece in religious terms as a battle between merciless Muslims and enslaved Christians who longed for religious freedom. Another important factor was that many Americans viewed the Greek War as a struggle against tyranny, similar to their own recent national revolution. In fact, this idea was actually actively promoted by letters sent from Greece. Women played an active role in organizing many of these events, and their success owed a great deal to their zeal. The funds raised were intended to support the Greek war effort and were largely turned over to European Greek committees and not sent directly to the Greeks, which was a blunder, as subsequent events showed. On an official level, the United States government, guided by President Washington's advice to stay out of European affairs and the Monroe Doctrine, maintained official neutrality. Even Thomas Jefferson, who had met Corais in Paris and was certainly a Hellene, advised Monroe not to make an exception on behalf of the Greeks. If you look at the correspondence, Monroe actually came very close to wanting to recognize the Greeks officially. And he wrote to Jefferson about it, and Jefferson writes back to him and really tells him that it's not a good idea, which is not usually mentioned in connection to with Jefferson. But that was in keeping with the politics of the time, and of course with Adams and others within the government. This, however, did not prevent presidential expressions of sympathy and active lobbying for a change in official policy by prominent politicians such as Daniel Webster, Edward Everett, and others who collectively were called the Grecians. What was not known except to a few insiders at the time was that the United States had a secret agent in the Levant who was reporting to the president on the Greek War while trying to negotiate a commercial treaty with the Ottoman Empire. Actually, there was more than one. Even the American consul in Smyrna was pro-Turkish, and Commodore Rogers, the commander of the American squadron in the Aegean, had been instructed by the Secretary of State to expedite the negotiation of this treaty to protect and expand economic ties. Thus, no matter how popular the Greek cause was, or how much lobbying was done by influential citizens and politicians, secret diplomacy based on the value of Turkish commerce and the strategic considerations negated all official efforts to assist the Greeks. There was only one instance when the U.S. government looked the other way. This was the so-called frigate affair, which enabled a warship named the Hellas to be built in New York and sailed to Greece. The Ottomans were so impressed by this ship that when they finally signed a treaty with the US, they added a secret clause that stipulated that the Americans build similar warships for them. Thus began the American military aid to Turkey, which continues to today. It's more complicated than that. They actually didn't build ships for the Americans at the time of the treaty. That they did that later on, but they did train Turkish sailors and instructed them. And it really, really is the beginning of the whole aid to Turkey affair that still takes place today. So on an official level, with the exceptions of gestures of sympathy, the United States in reality did little to aid the Greeks. The American people, however, did a great deal, especially after 1826. Prior to this year, the large amounts of private donations that went to aid the Greeks were sent through intermediaries. Unfortunately, most of it had little effect and was either diverted or wasted. In fact, after 1826, Greek fever declined as news reached America of the disunity, royalist sentiments, and military disasters that developed in Greece. This did not, however, stop American aid and interest. It transformed it. In order to understand how this happened, let me turn to the small number, about 12, of Americans who actually went to Greece and fought in the war. Very little is currently known of the activities of many of these brave men, which is why I'm working on the book. It is interesting to note that among them was an African American, James Williams of Baltimore, who we talked about already. I've discovered that there was also another African American with Lord Byron in Missolonghi, who was the only American with him when he died. That's another story. Of these American heroes, 3 stand out for their devotion to the Greek struggle and their contributions: George Jarvis, William Peckham Miller, and Samuel Gridley Howe. We have no portrait of Jarvis, so here's a document from the Jarvis archives. It was his kind of his Greek passport. They also led America's most important contribution to the war because they were largely responsible for the aid. They brought large amounts of aid and personally participated in its distribution. You've already heard a little bit about that. Dr. Howe also founded an American hospital on the island of Poros, helped build a mole, and he founded a colony with a kind of American style agricultural information near Corinth. And recently, I've learned that colony has been excavated. Professor Kourelis, a noted archaeologist, has been working on it. And in fact, they found House, which I found fascinating, that they found where he actually stayed. I know that others are working on that particular colony and its history, and hopefully we'll get a more detailed understanding of what that was all about. The idea for such a colony, which a lot of people don't know, I found mentioned in one of Jarvis's writings. So it was something that Jarvis had also thought of. And Jarvis also supported Greek schools and orphanages. If you go through the Greek National Gazette, I spent 2 summers going through the various volumes of the Greek National Gazette and other Greek documents. You find Jarvis and Howe and others mentioned in these Greek documents from time to time. And it's fascinating how they supported the philanthropic efforts of Kapodistrias and others before and after Kapodistrias was there in various ways. Over a 2-year period, at least 8 shiploads of food, clothing, medical supplies, and other items were collected and shipped to Greece utilizing American merchant ships. The ones already documented are contained in the following chart. And this chart comes from Larrabee, a fascinating, wonderful book. Here's what Miller looks like. Of course, Howe is well known. Various photographs and renditions. There he is with his fustanella. And this is the list that appears in Larrabee. Unfortunately, Larrabee does not give us a sources for where he picked up all this information. So it's something that has to be reconstructed. I discovered an additional ship going through the sources, in addition to the list that's here. And as the chart indicates, these cargoes of life-saving supplies gathered from donations from the American public were valued at over $130,000, which equal many millions of dollars in today's dollars. In order to make sure that the food and supplies went to the most needy, and it was only supposed to go to civilians, the Americans had to contend with many prominent Greeks who tried to steal them, including even General Kolokotronis. In fact, we know of at least 2 American supply ships that were captured by Greek pirates, and they sold or diverted the supplies to their troops, which happened despite the fact that the Greek government agreed that they was only supposed to go to civilians. In some cases, American warships had to defend these cargoes by intimidating and forcing local capitani to leave them alone or return stolen goods. The entire subject of Greek piracy during the Revolution is little studied, and how it relates to the American role is something that hopefully I'll be able to add some information to. Thousands of starving and helpless Greek women and children, and those too old or sick to fight, were saved by this humanitarian aid. And that these Americans distributed this aid at the risk of their lives under very difficult circumstances. Fortunately, Miller, Jarvis, and Howe and others have left us precious and dramatic descriptions documenting their humanitarian work. In order to give you an appreciation for what they did for Greece, I will quote a small section. Lou, can I go into this, or have I exceeded my time?
No, this is fascinating. Let's continue.
Okay. November circa 1827, near the Isthmus of Corinth. After landing and securing the remainder of our cargo at Poros, I proceeded with a portion of it to the Isthmus of Corinth, where great numbers of refugees had assembled from different parts of the country and were living in a state of the most shocking privation and distress. We drew up our barrels in a hollow square to receive the charge of the ravenous multitude who seemed eager to devour them whole, without waiting for the dilatory process of opening and meting out portions. The confusion and contention were inconceivable. The miserable beings who had been living for months upon no better fare than the beasts of the field were almost frantic with joy at the unexpected arrival of wholesome and nutritious food, and many of them, no doubt, would have risked their lives in the eagerness of their impatience to secure a single oka of flour. I shall never forget the feelings with which I was agitated when surrounded by this vast assemblage of poverty and misery. There were old men, gray with years, and sinking under the infirmities of age. There were mothers with helpless infants screaming at their breasts. There were virgins in the prime of their days. And there were children without number in the season of playful innocence, all exhibiting the same emaciated and death-like countenance, all clad alike in rags and covered with filth and vermin, the unavoidable consequences of their homeless and destitute conditions. Many among the hapless throng had seen far better days, but oh, it was affecting almost beyond endurance to hear the tales of woe with these houseless refugees related to us, how they had fled from the blaze of their dwellings and found refuge in some mountain retreat from the swords of their bloodthirsty pursuers, how they had seen their friends and families butchered before their eyes and led away into captivity, more terrible than most tormenting death, and how they themselves have been wandering up and down the land, seeking rest and finding none, and suffering under toils and privation that reduced them to the forlorn conditions which we beheld them. We were so occupied for 3 days in the distribution of our cargo. This is what Post says, and that's from the book that you see in front of you. December 18th, 1827. In the evening, Jarvis returned from an excursion into the mountains upon which he had set out the day before, for the purpose of ascertaining the condition of the people and directing the manner of their assemblance at Almiro. So you see how organized these three heroes were. Thousands of miserable human beings were collected about the villages and were living in caves and clefts of rocks in a state of utter destitution, ready to perish from the want of the simplest and most commonplace necessities of life. In 4 following days, we employed in feeding the starving multitudes that were constantly pouring down from the mountains. The number of persons to whom we administered relief was about 18,000. This is just one time, 18,000. Principally women and children and old men from Coron, Modon, Navarino, and other Messenian towns. I have no doubt that the friendly aid and sympathy of the American people has left behind it in Greece a respect and admiration for the American name, which will not soon be forgotten. End of quote. I estimate that the number of Greeks saved from immediate starvation, based on accounts like these I have quoted, were probably over 200,000. 200,000. In one of his writings about the struggle, Edward Everett, America's greatest Philhellene, who was also a scholar, a congressman, and president of Harvard University, sought to give an answer to the question of why America should send aid. His answer was that it did not matter that the struggling Greeks were the ancestors of the giants of classical civilization, but that Americans should care about them because of their common interest in liberty and virtue. Thousands of his countrymen apparently agreed with him and ignored commercial interests and official government neutrality to send aid to a people yearning to be free. This was the most significant American contribution to the Greek Revolution and was more important than the many presidential statements and political speeches usually quoted. Let me now briefly just talk about something you already heard about. As Lou mentioned earlier, the Kimball family settled in the United States, and there is a connection, which I'm fairly certain is genuine, with Paul Revere and the famous ride. In fact, the Kimball family has archives in New Jersey, and they relatives of Margaret, Gage's wife, remained in the United States, died, and are buried there. It's on one of my list of things to do, to go and investigate the archives and see what's there. And Lou also correctly mentioned John Paradise. Many years ago, on a family trip, I recommended. I took the family to Williamsburg, and John Paradise's house still stands. So it's probably the oldest house owned by a Greek American still standing, and it's something worth visiting. And of course, Thomas Jefferson had a correspondence with John Paradise, and he helped him with his knowledge of modern Greek. I have also found some documents that the first time that the United States Revolution was celebrated in Greece are mentioned in the journals of Jonathan Miller, Peckham Miller, and Howe. And I'll close with this. They're very short. July 4th, 1827. All eyes at Poros were turned towards me this morning. This is from Miller. As the birthday of my nation, I therefore concluded to make a small dinner party and close it by drinking a few toasts. Germans, Englishmen, Greeks, and Americans composed our party. We had many patriotic toasts, and the afternoon passed away agreeably. So, for the first time, the American Revolution was celebrated in Greece by Americans and Greeks together in 1827. The reference from Howe is July 5th, 1827, and is not as positive, or it's much more somber because he was aware of the political situation at the time. Yesterday, the glorious anniversary of American independence, I passed here not in rejoicing for the progress of liberty and the happiness of man, for be the march of these that we may have in the West. Poor Greece has not seen them dawn upon her. Only they're fading away. Her affairs are going on every day from bad to worse, and they have now arrived at such a pitch that the inhabitants of the Morea are actually beginning to submit in despair. This, of course, did not happen because what happened was Navarino and other events which led to success. And so what the situation what it looked like to Howe at the time did not come to pass. Thank you for your kind attention. I hope I haven't been too repetitive and too long.
No, you weren't repetitive or too long, quite frankly. We can all unmute, I guess, and just have a.
I thought that was great.
Yeah, and have just a general discussion. What becomes obvious to me is that not enough research has been done on the topics that we've been talking about, because many of us know, because we've been involved in these discussions over a number of years, but a lot of stuff came up and is actually helped with some of the research. When we started in 2020, if everybody remembers, to start to do a whole bunch of stuff leading up to the revolution, the 200th anniversary of the Greek Revolution. It's just amazing the amount of panel discussions we had. And as a matter of fact, we had some of the scholars that furthered some of that information. And actually, we I think in some ways, this may sound crazy, affected some of the material that actually started to come out later. I think, though, that Constantine, we there's so much material that we have not actually gotten out yet. And that exists. You know, we have talked a lot about the linkage between America and Greece, and it's actually a lot more than we have even discussed. Okay, so there's a lot of work to be done. I think leading up to this is the 250th anniversary, so I do think that we need to do a little bit more information. Now, I'm willing to bet that there's records everywhere around the topics that we're talking about that go into some of the things that are of interest to us. One of the things that a few of you mentioned, was the fact that, and we have mentioned 100 times actually, that the people of the United States were the ones that supported the Hellenic Revolution, not necessarily, as you said, Constantine, and as also you brought up, Alexander, not necessarily the government itself. Okay, and I don't think we actually recognize. Correct me if I'm wrong, Constantine. I don't think we recognize the Greek state until the 1860s. I could be totally wrong, but I think we did not formally recognize the.
It took quite some time. I don't remember the exact date.
I think
but
it was
yeah.
actually that late. Okay,
Yeah.
it was actually that late, and you are correct. You are correct in that there were all types of agreements, side agreements, etc. And it would be interesting if somebody can go into the records in Turkey to find out the language of some of these agreements, because the Turks, especially during the Ottoman period, were very good at recording just about everything. So I'm not sure if there's material in Turkey with regards to that. But in terms of the United States, we mentioned briefly, for example, Perkins. It was kind of humorous that Howe was involved with an institution that Perkins basically funded, and for the blind, etc. And Perkins was one of the main characters, quite frankly, among the merchant class, the Brahmin class that was discussed, that in fact directed the government from getting away from actually recognition of the Hellenic Revolution, and in fact providing aid. And there's that famous thing, and I always wonder in my mind, they had talked about actually having the Congress vote on supporting the Greek Revolution, and then it got dissipated for some reason. It sort of like never happened.
It gets even more interesting, Lou, because we talk about corruption in certain places, but when they were building the 2 warships, steamships for Greece,
we know that it's a famous story. They were supposed to, Greeks were supposed to get 2 ships. They only got 1 ship.
Well, the Department of War got involved. So what happened is, I believe Howe helped intervene with Congress. So much like the excess defense articles with Congress, where the Department of War gets involved, they vote. I read a document, I forget where it was. Somehow he intervened. I'm sure there were others in the background. Congress voted, so the Department of War bought one of the ships, and the other one was sold at a much lesser value to Greece.
And the ship sailed to Greece with an American crew, which was technically illegal at the time.
That's what I'm getting at. This is how I'm circling around with it exactly.
Yeah, but also, correct me if I'm wrong. The money was gotten. The loan was
British.
They made a deal. They made a deal with the 2 shipyards, etc., to get 2 ships to be made. And
money was disappearing at the shipyard too.
The money disappeared. What was funny was also that Franklin Delano Roosevelt, was quoted as saying that one of his relatives, helped the Greek Revolution, but the relative that he was talking about was one of these guys in the shipyards, quite frankly, who stole the money. So it's kind of funny. But getting back to what we were talking about, I think that even though we've discussed this topic a lot, and you're correct, Constantine, and thank you for being part of chairing the committee this year regarding the 205, 250 lecture series. We had about 18 actually, presentations on that topic. There's still a lot to be done. And for example, Alexander is doing a lot right now, because we started talking years ago about if you remember, Alexander, about the cotton merchants, etc. And that led again to your research and all the stuff that you're doing, which I think is going to be very instrumental in changing the thought process with regards to Hellenes and American, particular merchants, okay, that had an effect on American history. So anyway, it's open. Anybody has any questions for anybody else, please, by all means, bring it up.
So clear, I'm not a historian, but I find the whole thing fascinating. Getting back to Alex, so I can look through American history through a subtle lens, and I'm watching, because obviously this is 250th year, 2026. And I was watching, again, I think I briefly mentioned this, but I didn't give you this backstory. So I'm watching War of 1812, and they walk through how sailors in New Orleans helped in that battle, and how a boy who was related to the sailors had gone back to Massachusetts. So I called back to Alex, I think they're talking about the Greeks here. What do you think about that? This is like all the subtle history that exists that we don't, with precision, hit on. It's fascinating.
Yeah, well, in putting what I put together, and putting it, you know, like a week ago, I was watching Burns, the American Revolution, and they were talking about smallpox, okay, and how it affected all the Americas. Not so much the British, because the British, they had already, discovered the inoculation process, etc. And when I was watching that with the smallpox, I said to myself, I was thinking of all these travel books I was reading, like Lady Mary Montagu, for example, who was in Constantinople in the late 1600s. No, she was born in the late 1600s, in the early 1700s, and how she was the British ambassador's wife to the Ottoman Empire, and how she had noticed the Greek ladies. They had, I don't know what they were called, but these Greek ladies who in fact were treating people with smallpox. Okay, and and then I said to myself, here we are, in watching the American Revolution, understanding that if Washington didn't eventually inoculate the soldiers, etc., then we would probably lost the American Revolution. And then when it just hits you, and you say to yourself, hey, I read that stuff. I knew that the Greeks, etc., were doing that, and the researchers that I mentioned who were educated in Italy, they were also in Constantinople. They had also seen the ladies and actually do this stuff, and actually researched that, and then, as a matter of fact, sent it to the Royal Society of London. Okay, their research information. So that small thing of watching again about the American Revolution with Burns. It created another link in my brain, okay, that how, and this is not something that people bring up, but I think it has to do with just reading different things and trying to tie them together. There's so much of this that we haven't connected yet, but hopefully we'll continue to reconnect.
Well, and putting it in a context, first of all, as Americans and to our fellow Americans, first and foremost, but I also think that it's an opportunity to put into the Greek American community a wider context, a wider discussion than what's currently being done. I've written, as you and Eric know, countless articles on, this story is a lot older than you think. This discussion is wider, and these types of things I think are some things to be very proud of, but they are very, very important, below the headlines turning points. And EMBCA has been instrumental in talking about these subtle turning points. I think that, for example, that whole question of inoculation needs to be run with by someone who's a physician, someone who's an expert, who can bring the history and the science together, because that's an amazing story.
No, it's an amazing story which saved thousands and thousands of lives. Actually, it's unbelievable. It probably affected the revolution more than any other thing. When I thought about it, I said to myself, "Oh, this is interesting." I said, and I thought about Lady Montagu, and
Lou, do you have a primary source mentioning the Greek origin of the inoculation?
Yeah, I think she had written, letters, actually, because she also had, we have to look at her letters. Her letters.
No, I mean from the American side, that Washington actually and the Americans made the decision based on Greek
No.
information.
The Americans did not make that decision based on knowing about the Greeks or what have you, or what they did. The Americans made that decision on the basis of what was taking place in Europe, in London, etc. But the fascinating thing to me was, where did that originate from? Not necessarily that the Americans knew it came from the Greeks, but that the Americans knew that was a process that was used by the British. Okay, but that British process came, in fact, from Greek researchers, and that's documented. That's not mythology. So that's documented, as is Lady Montagu's letters, including to the king at that particular time. She herself used that inoculation process that she had seen in Constantinople for her own son, and that stuff is documented, and it
You
exists.
know that Burns did a film on Benjamin Franklin, right?
Yes.
Yeah. And in that film, I found it fascinating that Benjamin Franklin, who was a member of the Royal Society, he refused to have his son inoculated, and his son died. And he regretted that throughout his life, according to the Burns film.
Well, one of the things that was mentioned by Burns is originally Washington didn't want inoculated soldiers because the problem was in the beginning of the revolution, even though they were getting smallpox, what was happening is he knew that they would be knocked out for a long period of time in the inoculation process. So I mentioned it was only a year after the start of the revolution that he decided he better do something. Okay, so I just find all these things fascinating, and the point I'm trying to make is that there's all this stuff we're talking about. The material exists obviously because you guys have dug it up. All I'm saying is I think there's a whole bunch of other material that we have not dug up yet, and I think as we start connecting the dots, we start looking at all types of interesting connections between the Hellenes and America. The other thing that most people don't know, but again, it's there, it's part of the history. We talk about the Barbary Wars. And in the Barbary Wars, before the Barbary Wars, there was all types of American ships that were stopped in the Barbary coast. There was all types of ships that were taken over by the Barbary pirates. There was all types of Americans who were sort of sold into slavery, if you will, and had to be ransomed. There were books written by Americans of what happened to them when they got captured, etc. All that stuff exists, and that issue against the Ottomans is a bigger issue than most Americans really understand. And when the Hellenic Revolution was taking place, all of that was in the American psyche of what was taking place by the Ottomans against the Americans, and why, to a certain degree, the American people wanted to support the Hellenic Revolution, in my opinion. And material exists; it's there. The books have been written, and I'm sure. Where are the old newspapers, Constantine? Going back into
look in connection to sources, Lou, and I'm speaking to my younger participants, and since this is being recorded, I want to urge the young people because people like myself are at the tail end of their research time. There's a vast amount of material in English, in newspapers all over the place. New York Historical Society, for example,
are these digitized? Constantine, are they digitized?
Some materials are digitized and some are not. One of the dangers that I worry about in the 21st century is that people will take the easy route and only deal with what's digitized and think that that's the total of what's there. Even in terms of publications, Eric mentioned the 2 volumes of Richard's Howe letters and documents, etc. And I'm sure that Harvard has made some of that stuff digitized, available. But there is material that's not digitized. And there's material that Richards left out of her book because she felt it was embarrassing to her father. So there's no substitute for actually going to the archives and digging stuff out and look at the original materials. Plus, very often, you and I have talked about this incessantly. There's so much misinformation on the internet.
No, forget it.
You can't just pick things up from the internet, even though you may think it's from a primary source. I have seen even secondary works quoted incorrectly, depending on who put the information up there. So I urge, people who are interested in these topics, and I'm very, pleased that the 2 other panelists are taking the time and the effort to dig out primary sources. And I learned a lot of items that they mentioned during the course of this presentation. There's so much out there that's waiting to be exploited that people are not looking at. Now, that's on the American side. What is very much neglected is material in Greek. The Greek archives, the ministry archives, and the various topika archia, the local archives, have yet to be exploited for American-related material. Very little has been utilized and made known. That's a whole vast area of research. Even the published materials, I tell you, as I mentioned, I spent an entire summer and part of a summer just going through the published National Gazette, the Greek National Gazette, and going through the documents to look for mentions of Philhellenes and Americans, etc. The same for the debates and all of the newspapers that were published in Greece at the time. There is the Greek Revolution is, you can spend a lifetime, and people have, just studying the Greek Revolution. The documentation and the first-hand accounts are vast and complicated to understand and sort out. There is a large number of volumes which I was able to obtain in my youth by a fellow called Protopsaltis. What he did was and it's only one collection, he collected first-hand accounts of participants of the Greek Revolution. There's no index. So in order to see if Americans are mentioned anywhere, you have to go through all of that. Messalongi, you and I mentioned during the presentation at the Federation that I found that Miller, William Peckham Miller, was actually at the last siege of Messalongi. He mentions it.
Yeah.
And he was there and survived. He must have written about it in the local newspaper somewhere when he got back to America. It was such a famous event.
Where would it be? Would it be in Vermont?
I would think in Vermont or somewhere. I've yet to see it, but I would find it extraordinary if, having not participated in the final siege of Messalongi,
that's like a major thing. That's like a major international
he wouldn't
thing.
have said something about it other than this little quote in the book on the report that he wrote to the funders of American aid. And I've been going through, I've been trying to find firsthand accounts of the siege, the last siege of Messalongi in Greek, to see whether they mention him.
Let me ask you a question, Constantine. Okay,
Yeah.
in terms of some of these archives, let's say I wanted to go to the archives of whatever university.
Right.
Do I have to be like a professor to go into the archives?
It depends. I don't think you have to be a professor, but they have to be convinced that you're doing serious research.
Okay, so let me ask the next question. There's a lot of material. There's a lot of material there.
Yeah.
Okay. Let's say you're not a professor, what have you. You want to get into a particular area of certain research. So you're saying only those people who can convince the librarians to get into the archives, they can get into the archives, which means that a lot of this information will not be pulled out because there's not that many people who are focusing on the type of issues that we're focusing in. Am I wrong on this?
No, and it's much worse on the Greek side. I mean, the Greek archives, for example, are notoriously difficult to gain access to, let alone the Ottoman archives. My colleagues in Ottoman studies, constantly, have to make applications, spend a lot of time to get access to the Ottoman material, and of course, anything that the current Turkish government feels is sensitive, they will not give you access to. So, even in the American side, going to another topic that's related, one of the things that I did, which I think you know, is I've given a series of lectures contrasting and comparing the American role during the Greek Revolution and the Asia Minor catastrophe.
Yeah.
Because in both cases, the American government did far less and provided much less support than the American people
And the American people.
on their own. And I've worked in the National Archives, and there are thousands of documents related to the economic role, etc. You know what Alexander's working on with commerce and the merchants, etc. There's a lot of material, I'm sure, lying all over the place.
Yeah, yeah.
Elena Frangakis at Queens College has been working on commercial stuff for her, entire academic life, and made some of that material known in relation to archives from European countries and some Turkish material, because she reads Turkish. It's a vast area, and what we need young people to care enough about our history and to spend the time to get the training and put the effort to to make a difference in the future. Enough preaching on my part.
No, I think it's correct, because there's all the material, in my opinion, is there. The problem is we've got to find it and look at it and then analyze it. And I just feel, and you're correct, by the way, I feel there's a problem even doing research here, unless you're some person specializing in something where you can convince some librarian to give you the information. But in Greece, as you mentioned, I can imagine in Greece, you have all types of impediments to getting any type of information on anything. And I could be wrong on this. Alexander,
No, you're right. I happen to know they even digitize the economic.
Forget about digitizing. You can't get into anything. You can't get into anything.
That's kind of my point, though.
Yeah.
Even if you tell them it's available, they're going to pretend it's not available.
Yeah.
Because I've had that happen.
Well, yes, that's true. And to your point, Lou, as we're, as we've talked about with Greek bureaucracy, anytime I have to deal with Greek bureaucracy, I get a case of the hives. But I'm not going to be negative here. I'm going to be positive and talk only about a positive situation. And the person in question, the director of the Hydra Archives, Dina Adamopoulou, and her colleagues. I mean, they stand out. But I'm also a Hydriot, and I've done a lot of work. But because of that connection, I was able to view the archives of Spetses. And, to Constantine's point, I was reading excerpts of the Botassi family prior to Spetses becoming part of the revolution, and correspondence back and forth. Do we get involved in this? The ability to be right there when they were having debates on do we roll the dice here? And in fairness, the Spetsiotes were before us; they were the first. But having that kind of information and then putting it in a context that can be read both by people in Greece, but also the diaspora and the wider community is a great opportunity. I'd say one more thing to Constantine's point, and I think he's absolutely correct. The big issue I think that we have is not enough young people, and that the economics of the academy are extremely difficult. I mean, there are incredible archivists that are passionate about this, but something has to be done. I mean, just as, and we have initiatives. We have what Stelios Hatzioannou did to subsidize the salaries of, Greek doctors on the islands. I would love to see that certain cultural activities or other important activities, certainly there's key activities that are being done, demographic, national defense, but also cultural preservation. there needs to be some sort of support, and we certainly can't expect the Greek state to do it. And I would suggest, and I'm only going to dip my toe in this, so stop me before I go on too far. A lot of Greek organizations just they don't get this. So, building awareness of the need and of the issues, I think, is very important.
Well, I think Constantine and I know a little bit about the interest of some of the topics that we're talking about. We would have these lectures every week. Like I said, we had between Greece and here, we've had like I don't know, like 18 different lectures. But what was interesting is the amount of people who would come to listen to them. We didn't care, by the way, the fact that there were very few people listening. We just wanted to get that information out, which was to us, I think, more important. I think in terms of governments, etc., Greek government or whatever, is I don't think they want the history to get out. Okay, I could be wrong. Maybe Constantine, I'm wrong. I don't know, but I just get the impression that there's certain histories that have been out there that certain, I'm not going to say propaganda or what have you, but certain things that are out there that people don't want to talk about what the reality was during these time periods. They want to create this illusion of certain things happening, and that's what I feel. I could be wrong. Constantine, am I wrong on this?
Well, look, I mean, Greek, what's not understood is that almost every period of Greek history is much more complex than it might seem on the surface.
Yeah.
And in order to really unravel it and to understand it, it takes a lot of effort, and it takes a multitude of sources and expertise. And I think it was Alexander's correct that financially, you're not going to make any money by being in Greek history, or spending your time and effort and life studying this. Most people need to make a living, and it's you really have to be devoted to the subject to do this. Something I'll mention, since you gave me the opening, that you and I are aware of, is I've written a proposal, which I've given you a copy of, for a new Greek American history. Salutos was done in, what was it, 64?
Yeah.
So many years have gone by. Moskos and others are really just pamphlets. They're not very detailed. What we need, and look at what has been discussed here: the Barbary Corsairs, the Decatur, the Revolution, the cotton merchants, all of these early connections, Dragas and Louisiana. That's all part of Greek American history.
Yeah.
And yet it doesn't appear to any significant degree in our narrative. And I think that young people would appreciate and get excited, not only Greeks and Greek Americans, but even Americans,
absolutely,
knowing about this. So what we need is a 2-volume work, which I've written a proposal to put together. I put together an international committee of specialists on various pieces to work on a new history that could also be digitized with educational modules that could be used in schools, etc. It really is, I think, a crying need. I made a presentation, Lou, I don't know if I told you about it, to a president of a HEPA. And there was not much interest, I'm afraid.
Listen,
that is that's a huge discussion, right?
I can't speak to that. But let me ask you something. In terms of the professors, all these different people, Hellenic American Studies, blah blah blah, all these people, are they also keeping whatever information they want to put out close to the vest, and they don't want to share stuff? Or am I looking at this incorrectly?
I think a lot of the information is out there. Anagnostou has this Greek website where he publishes a newsletter and has bibliographies, etc. No one,
Yes.
in my opinion, has done more for Greek American history than Steve Frangos,
Oh,
who
yeah, that's
used
true. What happened
who
to him?
well, he's a bit of a recluse. When I go to the MGSA conference in Chicago in October, God willing, I'm going to try
I'm
to knock
speaking
on
there
his door.
too.
Are you? I'm going to try to look him up.
Yeah, I'm friendly with him. I've got a lot of respect for the work he's done.
Have you spoken to him recently?
Like 2 months ago.
Oh, so he does talk
But
to you.
oh,
That's
absolutely.
extraordinary.
No, I mean his work. I would say, as far as Greek Americanists go, I have a huge amount of time for his work.
Yeah.
I- it- a lot of times, academics are not necessarily the best at building awareness, and I don't consider myself a typical academic because most of my background has been in corporate and small business. This has just been a passion that I've managed to parlay into another career. But I think there's an incredible amount of work. I think that there's a lot of dedicated scholars. I think that there is no money here in this, and that's difficult. So it often will fall to people who are independent and independent both in thinking and independent financially to making these things work. But uh, you implied it. I have very little faith in most Greek organizations, with the exception of EMBCA, which again is run by volunteers and is really I'd say a trust of so many different trajectories and stories. But we can make this happen. And I know Chicago well, so let's keep in touch. And
Yes,
You're
let's go.
exciting me.
Let's go find Steve together.
Hey, wait a second, man. You didn't invite me to go to Chicago. What?
Yes, I did. I sent you the MGSA information.
I'm just kidding.
okay, well,
I'm just kidding.
this is recorded. Lou, you're invited to Chicago.
Eric, we have to be in Chicago. We have to go to Chicago.
And yes, I mean Eric. Yes, that's so. Let's figure on reconvening this discussion
We will.
in Greektown,
We will.
in
Hey, Ray, we did that
Chicago.
once.
We've done that, and Lou and I have done it. Now it's time for all of us to do it.
All right, let's wrap this up then. So let's start, Alexander. Just some final thoughts, words, etc.
Well, look, I think that we're very fortunate to have Constantine really hit on all the issues. What I'd say is the Greece America story is a lot older, a lot richer, a lot more multifaceted than we think. And as you know, being a proud citizen of both countries, at a point, at milestone dates for both of our countries, I really think that it is something that I want to focus on, particularly as my career changes and reorients. So I would just leave with that. This is a lot more interesting, and it's a lot older and a lot bigger of a subject.
I think it's a great topic, and I'm glad we are continually jumping into it. Eric, your thoughts?
Believing everything Alex said. Also, my thread. I'm always talking to civilian warrior ethos. I've even talked to Alex. We talk. We're obviously into history. He's at obviously a higher level than me in what he's doing. But I'll stick to even the research he's doing. You don't have merchants going across the planet without warrior ethos, because on the high seas at those times, there was a lot going on. Every one of these stories, even we know this was a trajectory. The Boy Scouts was a path for warrior ethos training. All these different things through life. And why would all the Americans, you're a farmer in New England, give resources to Greece? Why? There was a fervor there, a passion, a drive. I can only hope that all these conversations continue. And with everything going on in the world, I thought Constantine was going to, when he started talking about research, I thought he was going to say people are getting lazy. They'll start asking the AI, because that's pretty much what they do now. Never mind going to digital records. So really appreciate being involved with this one. I was outclassed, but I really do appreciate it.
No. It's always
Hardly.
no. You're the best.
Hardly.
Constantine, your thoughts? some
No,
thoughts?
I've already given you pretty much everything that I wanted to say, and keep up, the important work you're doing. And what we need is we need more younger and passionate participants. You know what? Since Steve's name came up, and you can tell him, Alexander, that I quote him constantly. Um,
So do I.
yeah, he's always fond of saying, Gus, the information, the material is just lying there on the ground,
He's
waiting for
right.
somebody to pick it up. And,
Yeah,
and people
Speaking
just
of
keep
that,
walking by and they don't pick it up.
speaking of that, Constantine, I'm not sure you recalled when I met you. Before I came on here, John Bolaris, U.S. Marines retired, showed me a picture of you and he together before he hopped on. So he's probably been watching this whole time. So he went up to see you a few years ago. I think it was 2019.
Oh,
He's another
wonderful.
history
Yeah.
buff. Yeah.
Well,
Good.
and yeah, he's a young. Well, just a point on John. I mean, he's been on an EMBCA panel, but he is extremely motivated. Given our ages in our 50s, Eric, we can call him a younger man, right? And he's of an age that where he's one of the kinds of people that we need to keep the torch going, and we need to find more of them. And that's on all of us. One thing, Constantine, is we need to make sure that we get all of our contacts traded. All of us. I mean, I know that Lou is our fullest common denominator, but there's discussions that need to take place well before all of us, Lou, Eric, Constantine, and I meet in Chicago.
okay.
Okay.
We'll
Listen,
arrange the restaurant.
gentlemen, this has been a fascinating discussion, a great discussion, which of course will continue as we go along. Our next panel discussion is going to be on June the 28th. It's called Penelope as Symbol, from Homeric Hellas to Modern Sparta. So we'll be discussing Penelope, who herself, the wife of Odysseus, who herself was a Spartan princess, a cousin to Helen of so-called Troy, and also among the exciting stuff is that there's a discussion to actually, and this will be the first time I think it's announced because we're going to have the people who are doing it, but a discussion to work with the government, but help raise money to put a statue of Penelope in Sparta. There's no statue of a woman, a woman figure in Sparta. And this is going to be a fascinating discussion. There's already an artist who has created the image. As a matter of fact, they know what it's going to cost to cast a bronze statue. So we're going to have an interesting discussion about Penelope herself, but also this exciting project, hopefully once it's approved by the government in Sparta, to erect a statue of Penelope. I find it interesting and a different type of topic, but still a great topic. Thank you all for being with us, everybody, and have a pleasant rest of the day. Thank you. Take care.
Thank you.